But what's going to be the biggest problem going forward when we have guys making 80, 90, $100 million not playing back-to-back games? When that new TV deal kicks in next year, and you got a guy making $85 million, and he says,
Nah, I don't really feel like it.
We can't have a guy making $95 million saying, I can't play basketball 4 days a week.
Okay, but how do you fix load management?
You play basketball, man.
Thank you!
When it comes to the biggest dumpster fires in the NBA, there's none bigger than the Philadelphia 76ers. And looking at their so-called superstar duo, that being Embiid and Paul George. These guys, they deserve each other. As looking at Embiid, an historic playoff choker, playoff dropper, who complains, makes excuses every playoff run. And Paul George, very similar. The playoffs always chokes, underwhelms, and just comes up short. But for PG, it's a tad bit worse. As looking at his career right now, basketball is a side hustle funding his true passion, which of course is podcasting.
It's funny because it's true.
When looking at George's entire career, I would say in Indiana, Oklahoma City, even Los Angeles, not once was this guy a superstar player and a bona fide championship caliber guy. And Embiid, 3-4 years ago, had a chance to be that. But nowadays, in my view, the worst superstar in the game. And it's getting so bad nowadays that superstar label might be too much praise. As looking at superstars, there's a certain way you carry yourself on and off the court and as a leader. Embiid doesn't do that, and Paul George has never done that.
Don't worry about it, just follow my lead.
George, way off, it's the side of the backboard.
And looking at Philadelphia's record, it's no secret, the worst team in the Eastern Conference, on par with the Washington Wizards. As right now, they're a pitiful 3-13. And out of those 16 games, the big three, Embiid, Paul George, and Maxey, they played a total of 1 game. Actually, scratch that, they played 1/2 of a game, because of course Paul George in that game got hurt, got injured, and is now out for who knows how long. Less than 20 games into the year, Tyrese Maxey has missed 6 games, Embiid missed 11, and Paul George has missed 8. Like those Nets teams 3-4 years ago, this Philadelphia team, they have a big three, tons of talent, depth, and a competent coach. But despite that, their superstar players are just too fragile for any of that to matter at all.
Ah, fragile. It must be Italian.
Well, I think that says fragile.
And much of that Brooklyn team, there's no real alpha, just go-getter leader who shows the way and makes guys follow him. Embiid's not that guy, George isn't that guy, and Maxey is just kind of too young. And looking at all those 3 players, not just hurt and injured, but stats-wise, the worst they've been in quite some time. I mean, look at Paul George right now, probably the worst year in over a decade, and it's coming off a summer where he claimed he was underpaid and disrespected. And of course, Joel's numbers in the toilet. Even Maxey has regressed in every stat, points, assists, boards, and shooting splits across the board. Long story short, Philly right now in all areas, they're an absolute mess and a dumpster fire. And look, I'll give them credit on one thing. They had a players-only meeting to address the problems, kind of clear the air, turn the season around before it gets really, really ugly. Give them credit for doing that. Now, for a players-only meeting, it means players only inside these walls, nothing leaks or gets out. For Philadelphia, of course, things got out immediately. And looking at someone like Paul George, again, this guy, no self-awareness at all. He goes on his podcast talking about a players-only meeting.
Podcast P fam, welcome back to a Shut Up, Bitch!
Right now, you're the worst team in the Eastern Conference, you're injured, your team, your new city, they despise you. And what do? You go on your own podcast to just clear the air to millions of people online. Once again, Paul George's priorities are just not in the right place, and this guy's ego has to be out of control. As looking at that podcast, a nice little cute player podcast, interview guys, tell stories, that's cool in the summer, the off season. But during the actual season, if you're still podcasting and you're losing, then we have a problem. Looking at Paul George in Philly, day 1 of the NBA season, October 23rd, Since that date, Paul George's podcast has posted 16 videos. Now, George on the court in that time period has only played 8 games and also missed 8 games. So think about this, Paul George, more podcast episodes than actual games played.
It'd be funny if it weren't so pathetic. No, what the heck, I'll laugh anyway.
That right there is downright pathetic. I don't know who Paul George's PR firm is, his agent is, but get this guy off YouTube, off his podcast, for at least a couple of months. And one thing I do want to hammer home, for teams like the Lakers, the Celtics, the Knicks, 76ers, those teams kind of built the NBA, they're staples of the NBA. For those teams with passionate fan bases, you gotta be on the ball, playing hard, and not just messing around, being nonchalant. For someone like Paul George, his demeanor, his attitude, it just does not fit Philadelphia. Guys like Iverson, Dr. J, Moses, Barkley, those guys, they played all out, they played hard, and they came to work ready to grind. And even looking at other sports teams in the area, the Steelers, Eagles, the Flyers, all those teams in one respect have an identity of playing hard and taking the game seriously. This Philadelphia team does not do that. And you gotta ask the age-old question, who's to blame, what's to blame for this culture, lack of leadership, and just dysfunction? Who I look to is, of course, Joel Embiid, their best player, but not the best leader.
And that's the truth, with some cheese on it.
And look at Embiid, this guy's entire persona, his quote-unquote leadership style, the way he carries himself, the team carries themselves, is like they're a multi-time champion, they're a dynasty in the making. The entire Embiid era since day one, the foundation of this era, has been built on tanking and losing on purpose. If you ask me, Embiid's entire career is kind of basketball karma. As when you build a foundation off tanking, losing on purpose, that's your foundation. You can't build a stable house on that, with that attitude, that mantra, and just that starting point. And looking at other great teams in NBA history, and just recent history, teams like the Celtics, the Heat, the Nuggets, the Warriors, all those teams that have culture, a standard, built on winning, playing hard, and showing up. In Philadelphia, what's their culture, their standard, just what's their backbone of their team?
No idea.
For guys like Joel Embiid and Paul George, they have all the talent, all the skill, even all the teammate help in the world. But for guys like that who are great players, or want to be all-time great players, they don't have that extra gear, that extra just it factor of the all-time great NBA legends. Of course, great players, great skill, overall ability, but not all-time NBA legends. So that right there is the end of the video, and I'll say one last thing. Joel Embiid for the longest time, what he's motivated by was individual goals, individual accolades. Back in 2023, when I was MVP, I think that kind of was the arc of Joel Embiid as a player. Came in, established himself, became an all-star, all-NBA player, then won an MVP. For Embiid, that was his crowning achievement, his championship, and kind of his arc as a player. Winning titles, numerous titles, making the finals, that's not who Joel Embiid is or ever was. As always, thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.